This presentation will cover Chapter 7 of the Communication Systems book, that being Safety and Health Concerns. So safety is an incredibly important part of what we do in applied technology, what we do in business and industry. And in everything that we're involved with, we need to make sure that we are not only practicing safe habits ourselves, but that as we become the business leaders, the managers, superintendents, supervisors, that we also ensure that people working for us are following safe practices. So when looking at a definition for safety and health concerns, we can define safety as actions to reduce the likelihood of personal injury. So safety is an action. And then to look at the definition of health, health being the freedom from physical disease or pain. So we do safe practices in order to maintain our health. The goal is to stay healthy, and that being freedom from physical disease or pain or injury or any things like that. So the important thing here is to remember or recognize that safety is an action. It's a verb, if you will, and that safe practices are actions that we do to reduce the likelihood of injury. And so we can do a lot of different things. We can set a lot of different things in place, procedures, rules, things that we need to follow and our workers need to follow in order to ensure safe working environments. So the government recognized the importance of this, and so in 1970 they passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And the reason they did this is if you think about the working conditions that existed, let's say for example in the 1850s and so forth, about the time of Industrial Revolution. So we had a lot of factories coming along, we had mass production coming along, and you think about the working environment in those factories, and it was really an unhealthy environment. So, you think about, let's say, for example, blade guards on different saws didn't exist. You think about the lighting in these factories. It was very dark in these factories. You think about the work conditions, the length of time that they worked. They worked long hours, and even the age of the people working. You had very young children that were working in these environments, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was really unhealthy work environments. Many people died. We had all kinds of structures being built up in America during the 1800s and 1900s, and lots of people died just because there weren't those kind of regulations out there. Owners weren't concerned with and didn't have to ensure that they established safe working environments. You think about something like the Hoover Dam, and there was a significant number of workers that died in building the Hoover Dam who were on ropes and working all along there and just fell and were buried in the cement, and that's where they stayed. And that's because they didn't have things like the safety harnesses and those types of things that are in place today. So in 1970, the government recognizes they needed to do something. So they passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act and produced OSHA, OSHA being the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So the OSHA Act produced OSHA, the administration. And the purpose of the administration was to assure, as far as possible, every working man and woman in the nation safe and healthful working conditions, and to preserve our human resources. And so it put an expectation out on employers that they must follow the OSHA standards, they must communicate these standards to their employees, and follow through with them. As part of that, then, compliance, safety, and health officers were created, compliance officers that would go around and check working conditions, would check businesses and industry to make sure that they were following those standards. They went around and did those things. And if a company or business was not following the OSHA standards, then they could be fined with a hefty amount of money, or even more so, they could shut them down altogether. And so some of you may have worked on job sites where the OSHA compliance officer showed up and maybe experienced a little bit of that, what happens when they show up and kind of the environment. The key is that OSHA has standards that you need to follow, and as you all become future employers, business owners, and those types of things, that you need to make sure that you follow, that you understand what those OSHA standards are, and that you follow through with them. So one of the things that the standards require is the use of MSDS sheets. And the MSDS sheets stand for Material Safety and Data Sheet, and these are a set of rules for businesses that use chemicals and other hazardous substances. And these MSDS sheets basically contain all kinds of information needed for those particular materials. And it's a requirement of OSHA that you would have an MSDS sheet for every hazardous material, every hazardous chemical that you would happen to have. So even if you think about a high school industrial arts or technology education teacher who teaches some cabinet making and they finish projects, do some finishing, that in those shops it's very common to find some lacquer, polyurethane, different stains. All of those have specific MSDS sheets, and those are supposed to be on file. And most importantly, they provide the information on safe exposure levels, explosion levels, and precautions for safe use, and what to do in an emergency. So they're important to have. Every business owner is required to have those on file and ready to go and communicated to their employees. Here's an example that you can see. Typically these MSDS sheets are about 15 pages long, and they provide all kinds of information. We're not going to go in depth in these areas. You will take an occupational safety class, and you'll go much further in detail in that particular area. But in this case, we just want to introduce the idea of these concepts to you. As part of OSHA requirements as well, you're required to have a safety program in place, and the purpose of that program is to recognize, evaluate, and control potential hazards in the workplace. And so part of having an effective safety program is, first of all, having it in place, having the OSHA rules and specifications in place, but then even more importantly, that you've informed your employees. It's one thing just to have a nice 3-wing binder with all the requirements and all the things you're going to do, but if that never gets communicated to the employees, then it's not really going to be in place, and you can get yourself in trouble. So it's important that the employees are informed on the OSHA requirements, because when it comes down to it, as the employer, you're responsible. You may even communicate it to your employees, but if they're not following it and they get caught, it's not them that's going to pay that fine, it's you that are going to pay that fine. So it's important that they're informed on it and they recognize that this is an expectation. So that's where it has to be a management-led initiative, that you are placing that importance on the safety program. Many businesses will set aside one day a month, or a morning a month, or an afternoon a week to communicate on the safety program. And this is just one way that demonstrates that you are doing everything in your ability to communicate to your employees on the safety program, and that ensuring that those things are being followed. So some of the things that might be included in the safety program is eye protection. Eye protection is incredibly important, and in many of the industries and businesses that we go out and work in the labs and shops and those types of things, you need to have some kind of eye protection. The baseline standard for eye protection is ANSI Z87. Again, in a few chapters ago, we talked about standards in the American National Standards Institute, and so they've established a standard Z87 for eye protection. And so if I'm a company that's making safety glasses, that I have to meet that standard in order to put the stamp Z87 on my glasses. If they don't cover as much of the eye as the standard requires, then they don't get that stamp. So again, that's a way to ensure consistency across the board. But there's all kinds of other areas as well that would need eye protection, and we need to make sure that we're doing that. Nose protection is an important area as well. Many of us have worked in some kind of cabinet making shop or a wood shop, and we may not think about nose protection in those environments, but it's actually incredibly important. Actually, the dust from the air that's produced from working with wood is one of the main causes of lung cancer in our workers today. And people who are in those environments for a long time really need to make sure they have nose protection. We need to make sure that there is some type of dust collection system going on in that lab. So if you're an owner of a cabinet shop, it's an expectation that you have some type of dust collection system, and there are specifications on how much air it can pull and how much it's cleaning out the air, and you're expected to have that in place for that particular cabinet shop. Ear protection is incredibly important as well. The OSHA has identified and the EPA has identified different levels and rules of how loud environments we can be in. We measure the loudness of sound in intensity and decibels. But it's not just how loud it is, it's also the duration of time that we're exposed to it. So you can see in your book and different diagrams on the web, for example, if you're in an environment that is, let's say, 120 decibels loud, you really should only be exposed to that environment for about 15 minutes. Much more than that, you should be wearing some kind of ear protection. And that's important to consider when you think about many of the labs that we work in. Let's say a wood shop that's got a planer running, it's very common for that planer to be 100, 110, 120 decibels loud, and if that planer is going to be running for an hour long, you really need to be having ear protection. So it's important to make sure you protect your ears, and as a general rule of thumb, if you must shout to be heard from 3 feet away, it's too loud, you need some ear protection. Skin and hand protection is important as well. Wearing gloves, protecting your hands, making sure you're not exposing your hands to chemicals or dangerous situations. So those are important as well. Foot protection, that you have steel-toed boots or shoes. When you're working in certain environments, you want to do well to protect your feet. You want to practice safe lifting and carrying practices or habits, and that if you lift something, that you lift with your legs and not your back. Some of the younger folks don't really recognize this, but over time you begin to realize when you start feeling your back and feeling it hurt, you think, man, I really should have maybe done a better job over the years of taking care of my back. So now is an important time to start practicing those safe lifting habits. Ergonomics is another important thing to consider. Ergonomics is communicated as the study of designing equipment and devices that fit the human body. So as we produce products, as we produce goods and that involve people, we want to consider the ergonomics. So for example, let's say you own a production company that makes chairs, like you see here. That there's the scientific factors that are involved that demonstrate how it's best for a person to sit in a chair. And especially if that person is going to sit in that chair for 8 hours a day working at a computer, that there are particular heights and angles and curves that make it so that chair will fit their body best. As you can see here with the computer example, that when you work at a computer, that your arms should be level, as you see here. If this computer is up higher, that places your fingers kind of at a curve like you see here, and that's how you develop carpal tunnel syndrome. And so it's important as we design fixtures that we consider how they're going to affect our body. If you own a production company and you have people that are working the line that are going to stand there and kind of do repetitive action, that there are things that we can do to help reduce the stress and wear on people's body so that, for example, they don't have to bend over and pass something down the line, that they can stand upright, that their feet can be in a comfortable position, and so forth. So ergonomics are incredibly important to consider. In your safety program, that you should use a standard color code, and throughout the facility that you have color identified different areas with the different colors, as you can see in the example there. In fire safety, we have different types of fires, and we need to follow through with those. If you go buy a fire extinguisher, you can see that they have type A, B, C, and D types of fire extinguishers, and those specific fire extinguishers work for specific types of materials. For example, a type A fire, which deals with combustible materials like wood, is a very different environment than a type C electrical fire. And a fire extinguisher for a type A fire may contain a lot of moisture and wet components to it, which works great for combustible materials. But you wouldn't want to use that type of fire extinguisher on electrical equipment or electrical fire because, as you know, that becomes a greater hazard. And so in many cases, you can buy a combination fire extinguisher, a type A, B, and C fire extinguisher that will work in all environments, and that's a good general way to go. I would encourage all of you to have a working and updated fire extinguisher in your home and in your car, and that you always know where that is, as well as when you're a business owner, a company owner, that you have those out and labeled and updated because those do expire over time. And then we want to follow the general safe practices. I'm not going to go through all of these at this time, but there are many things that you need to put in place. As a final note, it does cost a company money to put a safe program in place. However, what you have to do is you have to balance that, and in many cases, if you don't do it, it's going to end up costing you more in the long run. So important safety programs are incredibly important.